my parents are Polish, but I was born in Austria in 1946. And my brother was born in Bavaria in 47, younger brother. But of course I can't remember much of that story because I was too young. But I do remember coming out on the boat and later on looking at photos that Dad had made in Europe. And then we landed in Naples, and there would have been a big, what would you call it, a refugee immigration centre where a lot of displaced people were there ready because the Labor government at the time, and Arthur Caldwell was the, I think was the immigration minister, and they were bringing out refugees from Europe.
Yeah.
And they had everything set up there. So, like, I've got a thing there on my arm. You can probably see a little mark there. Can you see a little round mark there somewhere?
Yeah.
It's
around here.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's pinpricks from all the inoculations. That was the rule back then, that you had to be inoculated for measles, smallpox, chickenpox, all the things before you even come to Australia. And the parents were too. So that was part of the Australian policy then, to inoculate before you come out. So my parents were inoculated, and so was my brother. Anyhow, we got onto a boat in Naples, a ship called the Goya, and we come all the way from Naples down through the Mediterranean Sea, through the Red Sea, into Ceylon as it was then, the Sri Lanka now, land in Colombo there, and they refilled the ship. And then we sailed from there, bypassing Perth, all through the Bass Strait, between Tasmania and Victoria, of course, and into Sydney, Circular Quay, where we landed. And then we were transported to Bathurst, where we stayed for about a month. And from then, we come to Parkes, to the army camp out here, where we stayed for, I think, 2 years. And then Dad was working at Bankstown Square as a concreter, but because it was a really wet season, he couldn't get much work. So he applied for the job on the railway here, and we were sent out to Tullamore, 100 k's northwest of here, where Dad was a fettler on the railway. And we lived in tents. No running water, no electricity.
Yeah. Were there other people from your area of Europe here at that same time?
Yes, yeah, there was a lot of Polish people here, but not only Poles. There was Dutch, there was Czech, there was Croatians, there was German, Hungarians. A lot of different nationalities were here. And a lot then went, they went everywhere. And then a lot went to work on the Snowy Mountain scheme, you know, the water thing there, the hydroelectric thing. But we went there, we didn't know. Dad just wanted a job. He didn't know where Tullamore was, he didn't have a clue. It could have been in Western Australia for all he knew. But we landed out there, Dad got a job as a fettler. I went to school out there, started out there in 1951 as a 5-year-old kid. So I went from there.
Yeah. What's your earliest memories? You came out on the ship. Have you got any memories of being on that boat?
Very vaguely I remember being seasick.
Yeah.
And it was a horrible feeling. I can remember, I was only 3.5, but I do remember the sway of the boat. And we had no medication in those days, like now you can take up a pill and you don't, no seasickness. But back then, 49, I remember being real crook. Yeah, very sick, seasick, yeah.
And what was the reason, can you tell us, to end up at the camp in Naples to begin with? What was the context there?
Well, as best as I understand it, see, there's a big gap from when the war ended in 45, like end of 45, middle of 45, wasn't it? Around about,
45.
Yeah. Well, see, I was born in January 46, so just after the war finished. But from 46 to when we left Naples in 49, October 49, of course, then I was born in Austria in 46. My brother was born in Bavaria in 47. From 47 to how we got to Naples in '49, that's all very vague. My parents, especially Mum, wouldn't talk about it. Well, I always felt, just from Mum's body language and the way she was frightened to go back.
Yeah.
Dad was fought in the war as a cavalryman. He was on horseback when the Panzer Division came over the border in '39.
Yeah.
Dad was part of that first attack that come back at them, but they had the Panzer Division tanks. He was on with his division, whatever, how many they were, cutlass, a pistol, and a sword, whatever they had.
Yeah.
Fighting men with in army tanks.
Yeah.
So, but the reason they didn't want to go back, I always sensed it was because of fear. What the fear was I had no idea, but it was fear. Because Mum could speak German and Russian, and she was in Berlin. She escaped from Krakow, and she escaped into Berlin, and because she just melded in with the because I mean she looked like a German Fraulein, for all blonde, beautiful looking woman, and so she could speak the language. And she just melded into Berlin as a waitress or whatever else she did. People done a lot of strange things to survive during the war. Probably some things you're probably not proud of. My father was captured. His war lasted a week at the best. He was captured, got shot in the shoulder, both legs.
Right.
He was transferred from the Germans to the Russians. Prisoner of war. Not much of a life from '39 to when the war ends.
Really? Yeah. And then at some point there, he's met your mother.
Yes. Yeah, must have met your mother. There's a gap there again where I've tried to join the dots, and it just comes a bit too. I wouldn't ask Mum because, it's a bit of a mysteries there along the way there.
How do you feel not being able to join the dots? Is that frustration for you?
Yes, a lot of frustration because I then put my own solution to it.
Yes.
And it still doesn't add up. So it's I could get my mother to a certain point, but then she would start to cry, and I couldn't push her anymore. She would say, "We're now living in Australia. That is the past. The past is the past. I don't want to talk about the past." I tried to catch up in the past in '93. I went over to Poland.
Yeah.
Went to Warsaw. Went to the International Red Cross to try and trace things. Got to a certain point. I had certain information that I give them, but it wasn't enough because I wanted to trace back a lot of things. But wherever I went, I just run into brick walls. People wouldn't say too much. Again, you can put your own analysis to why. My father was well off because his brother was in the Navy. He had another brother in the Air Force. They were very patriotic. They lived in a town called Bydgoszcz on the Polish-German border. His parents had a vineyard of X amount of acres. I don't know the exact number, but they had their own distillery. They had their own outlet where they it was like not like a cafe, but whatever it might be, a wine place or whatever. But they sold their wine onwards, and plus they had this restaurant type situation. Dad was in Berlin in '36 in the Olympic Games. He saw Jesse Owens win one of his medals. I don't know whether it was in the one of his 4 medals he won.
Yeah.
But to be in Berlin in '36, I couldn't afford to go to the Olympic Games in 2000. But my father was in Berlin in '36. So they were reasonably well off. I know it was across the border, I understand that.
Yes.
But to have his own business back then, with his family, to own a vineyard back in '36, and probably before that, because they would have had it in the 20s, wouldn't they? I mean, and that was one of the reasons I was going back. I wanted to try and see if I can catch up on some of that land. Because my ex-wife, who's Estonian, they had a lot of their land given back to them in Estonia. I wasn't trying to get the land back, but I just wanted to know if I could see if there was any path there that maybe where is that land now? I just wanted to find out.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking if I probably did, you don't know, I might finish up in a dry gully somewhere with a bullet in my head. So I didn't go down to Big Gosh. Yeah. I didn't go down there. Once I got all these
push back
the red flags, I backed off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think if you had been able to go back and join the dots, that would have made more sense for you.
Yeah.
And then you would have been more at peace, perhaps.
Yeah. I've only spoken, where I found it really, one of my daughters, she's in Estonia, Julianne, she's a journalist, married with 3 children, but she come to me one day here in Parks and she said, Dad, I want Jan, her husband is Macedonian, and he said, we're doing a family tree from them. Can you help me with our family tree? I thought I knew this day had come.
Yes.
And I said, darling, I can't help you. I said, I'm not blaming anyone, but I tried back in 92 with Grandma when I went to Poland in 93. I knew she only gave me a certain amount of information, not enough to join the dots any further. So when I struck that roadblock in 93, when I was in Warsaw, I come back to Parks, and then my brother put it on me and said, you've got to ease off with Mum. You're going too far. You can't push her anymore. She's an older woman now. You've got to respect her wishes. So that's what I did. Yeah. I thought that's the end of it. And I'm not going to push anymore, even though I wanted to, because of my own family. I wanted to give them information so they could start a family tree. But that's where it ended there. Julianne cried. She said, I'm sorry, Dad, but I'm not blaming Grandma. I said, you can't blame Grandma for what she went through the war. You've got to respect her.
What does it mean to you to be Pole? Tell us about that.
Very proud. Even though I'm a naturalised Australian, I was naturalised in 1957, my family was. The fact that I've got Polish blood running through my veins, that'll never change. And it's just it's a mental toughness in my eyes, because knowing what my father and mother went through and reading the history, to me, it means something. It really does mean something, and to know that they may have been decimated, but the young ones of Poland, they never put up the white flag, mate. They done what they needed to do. It was horrible. War was horrible, and a lot of innocent people were killed. No doubt about that. But if someone takes your dunghill, you're going to try and get that dunghill back, aren't you? No matter how or what. And they did. And if you read the history and know the history of the Polish resistance, it's a bloody proud history that I'm proud of, and I'm glad I'm part of that gene pool that I sometimes wish instead of being born in 46, I'd like to have been born in 26. But my mother was only 20 and was only 6 years old, but I would have loved to have been there. Yeah. I would have loved to have been there and having a go. Like the same as the Anzacs here, who fought here. To me, fighting for your country, you can't do better than that. If you go down in the fight, well, you go down in the fight, that's it. Yeah. But at least you know you've fought for your country. Proud of that, proud Pole, Ian, very proud Pole. Even though I'm a Dinky Die Aussie now, I've been here for, 73 years. I consider myself an Aussie, but I've still got Polish blood running through my veins. Yeah. Very proud of that, Ian.
And you could have ended up anywhere else, but you ended up in Australia.
In Australia. We had a choice of going to Canada, to America, to some of the South American countries, but because Australia was taking young families with children, that was one of their criteria, was because they wanted, this was a policy through the 40s, and this is what Australia wanted, so we just chose Australia. And I'm very proud, I'm very proud of the fact that Mum and Dad did. Yeah, I've been happy in Australia. I mean, I've had my moments where, I've had a broken marriage. I've got 7 beautiful kids, 6 beautiful grandchildren. I've had a fantastic life. It's been a roller coaster, but I'm still here. Still here. Tell the tale.
Here in Parks, you came eventually,
Yes.
after a month in Bathurst,
Yes.
to the migrant camp, which was out at the airport there.
Correct.
And you're just a young toddler, I
Yes.
imagine, running around with other kids
Kids
there.
there, yeah, well, I was only 3.5, 4 probably.
Yeah.
By then, I might have had 1950. I would have had my 4th birthday in January. I would have been 4. And I can remember Dad. We lived in these half-moon corrugated iron huts. They were army huts. And I can remember Dad getting the grey blankets and putting them up against the window to get a dark room, because Dad, with his camera, he had these trays of things. I don't know if it was methylated spirits or what it was, but he had this liquid stuff. And when he got his roll of film out of his Kodak, from the camera, he'd have to somehow or other enlarge it or transfer it onto this white paper. And it went through this smelly liquid stuff. To me, it smelled like methylated spirits, but whether it was or not, I don't know.
Yeah.
Turpentine, it could have been, something like that. But he was developing from his roll of film, and he was making photos in this dark room. I can remember being there in the room with him when he was doing it. I was only 4 or 5 then, but I do really remember that. Yeah.
Interesting how things like smells can be the memory that
Well, what would you think?
impregnates in your mind.
What would you think it was?
Oh, it's some chemical solution to develop,
Yeah.
to change the film into a positive film.
Yeah, because it was a pungent smell. 'Cause I remember we had this tricycle bike, 3-wheeler,
Yeah.
and he's got a lot of photos of us on that.
Yes.
So that's out at Tullamore.
Okay.
But then after that, he sort of just, I'm going to say, Dad was an alcoholic,
Yeah.
but also a workaholic. He'd work on the job from 7 till 4, and then he'd get himself shaved in the best way he could with the facilities we had out there, pretty primitive. And then he got a job as a barman at the bowling club at Tullamore, pulling beer.
Not a great job for an alcoholic.
No. Well, he didn't drink there. But once the bowling club closed, he'd walk back to the pub.
Yeah.
Even though the pub was supposed to close at 8 or 10 or 6 or wherever it was back in the 50s, the pub was always open. You only had to knock on the back door and half the town was in the pub.
Yeah.
Drinking till whenever.
Yeah. Well, I can't imagine the trauma that was affecting the migrant community that had come out from Europe post-war. And I imagine alcohol would have been a way of self-medicating for a lot of them.
No doubt about that at all. My father wasn't a violent man, but he never ever took interest in my life in the sense of sporting achievements, school achievements, or anything like that. He had no interest. He just he worked, and then he'd come home. We had this big radio, and he'd get shortwave, and he'd get the music going, and he'd want to conduct.
Yeah.
Somehow it sort of turned his mind away from his other problems. But there was one thing that always stuck in my mind, and I could never work out why. Mum would always make beautiful meals, and Dad would be eating them. But he'd always be saying, "There's nothing to eat." I'm about 5 or 6, and I'm thinking to myself, "Dad, there's a meal in front of you, you're eating it, and you're still complaining about there's nothing to eat." I could never work it out, because I was only a young kid at the time. But years later on, I'd talk to different people and other people that understood different things, and they said it was up here. He wasn't seeing it, it was up here, because when he was a prisoner of war, he lived on very small rations, bread and water, and that stuck in his brain. And whatever what information or what torture he would have endured, because being in the cavalry was a pretty elite back then for Poland in the 30s. That was the front line. Well, I don't know, they did have aeroplanes, but they were like mosquitoes compared to saber-tooth crocodile, whatever.
And I doubt they had UN conventions on how to treat prisoners of war. I can't imagine what he suffered over 5-6 years.
That's it. He would have suffered. And the fact that that food was in front of him, his brain was going back to when he was a prisoner. So that's the way it was explained to me, not by him, by other people that I've discussed it over a period of time, because I met a lot of Polish people as train drivers in Enfield, where I worked for 7 years from 67 to 74. And this was part of the, when I asked him to explain this particular thing I just mentioned to you, and that was one of the theories that they said was this because of what he endured during the prison war. So I always had a bit of compassion for Dad because of what happened there, and I still to this day, even though I didn't like his drinking. At 5, what can I say to my father at 5 or 6 or 8? I can't tell him. I wouldn't tell him, I couldn't. Because my life then was, because my mum and dad couldn't speak very good English, I was more or less, if mum went shopping somewhere, I was like her interpreter. Because if she wanted potatoes or bread or butter or sugar, I would have to, mum would tell me in Polish, and then I would translate back or talk back to the shopkeeper what mum wanted. And of course, I grew a little bit resentful after that, and not in a bad way, but my philosophy was, I don't want to learn any other, I want to learn English. I don't want to learn Polish, but to my eternal regret, I should have kept it. I knew later on, with hindsight, I knew I should be proud of your native language. But at the time, I was more embarrassed than anything else, thinking. Yeah. And of course, when I first went to school, I spoke Polish, and these people would have a go at me, and I'd come back at them in Polish. And years later on, I said to a bloke named Gordon Thompson, "Why did you ever do that?" I said, "We loved talking to you, Stanley, because if we stirred you up, you just come back at us in Polish." And we thought that was good for them. Didn't know how much upset I was. If I could have been a little bit more, I would have really had a go at them, like really had a go at them. But I didn't, because I was only young. But it set my mind that I just wanted to put my language behind me. Of course, Mum and Dad started to learn to speak English and everything else. But there was no community as far as out Tullamore with the Polish, no. We met them here in Parks when we come into Parks, but not out there. Yeah, so I just became an Aussie. Yeah. Even though they did call you a wog, I got friends that said, "Oh, your dad's a wog." And I said, "Well, to my best mate, I said, if my dad's a wog, then I'm a wog." "Oh, no, your father's a wog, but you're not a wog, Stan, you're our best mate." And I thought, I can't work that out. How can you call me father a wog and then I'm his son? I'm not a wog too? I'm not, but that's the way they worked it out. But anyhow.
So what did you end up doing, Stan? You finished school?
Yeah, finished school, got a job on the railway as a junior porter on the platform at the station at Tullamore. After 2 years, I transferred into Parks. No, sorry, I was 18, so that would have been 3 years. Into Parks, eventually went up to Loco as a labourer, and then become a trainee engineman, and become eventually a acting fireman, train driver. 33 years as a train driver, and then another 10 years working in a private company, Silverton, as a driver. So I've got a very proud record as a train driver. I'm very what I've done there.
Are the trains as important now as they were back then? How have things changed?
I think they're more important now. Were very important back then. I worked on steam engines. I worked on 3801, the bullet nose, the green bullet nose. Fired it from Sydney to Goulburn. I worked on Garrett's. That's a 60 class from Broadmeadow, from Gosford to Broadmeadow, and back from Broadmeadow to Gosford. I had a lot of time on steam engines from 67 to 72 when I come back. 74, 62, 67, 74. Yeah, worked on a lot of steam engines. Yeah, it was a good life. It was hard work. 50 cents an hour.
50 cents an hour.
When I started out here in 1960, 2 and 6 an hour. That was my first rate of pay, 2 and 6 an hour. Wouldn't believe it.
Yeah. Well, Stan, you've been very generous with your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing some of your story.
Yep, no, that's
really
good.
Appreciate it.
Yep.
People are going to enjoy to hear that.
Yeah. But I did have an interest area as a cricketer and umpire too, but that's another story.
Oh, okay.
Probably not for today. So
you're working and you're moonlighting as an umpire?
No, it wasn't moonlighting. No, that was a Dickie Dye career. Yeah. Because we had to allow to have certain amount of time off to play sport, recreation. That was part of our union conditions that we had with the New South Wales government. You just couldn't work 14 days a fortnight, keep on working, just burn out. Even back then, our union AFULE was very advanced, or I'd like to think they were. We had the best wages, best conditions, because we fought for them. We were bred to go to the government, and we did. We went them hard, and I'm proud of that part. I was a hard activist back then. Got trained in Sydney with some of the best, Jack Patterson, Bernie Willingale, Arthur Hurrell, I could name you 20 blokes. Bill Stannard, Wayne Cumber, lots of blokes, and they were hard. Well, I'll say it, they were hard left wingers, mate. They were hard. They were pushovers.
So the young fellas today can thank you and the likes for their improved working conditions.
Oh, no doubt. And we fought for those conditions, and we never took a backward step, because we had stable rostering codes, we had conditions, we had rates of pay, we had holiday pay where you got people say, oh, they got too much. Hey mate, when you go to work at 2 o'clock in the morning and you're shoveling 10 tonne of coal in Sydney Gold and you get 50 cents an hour for it, mate, I don't reckon that's too much.